Lena and Mark walked down the narrow jet bridge with their small bags close to them. They were siblings, both black, both used to travel, but always careful in new places. The airport day had been long, full of delays, loud announcements, and tired faces. Still, they carried a calm energy like people who knew how to stay steady under pressure. Lena held the boarding passes, Mark kept the passports and the phone charger. They spoke quietly, saving their energy, thinking only about sitting down and resting. The plane door opened, and cool cabin air met them like a soft wave. Inside, the cabin looked normal, rows of seats, overhead bins, soft lights, gentle beeps. People were already seated, some smiling, some annoyed, many staring at screens. A child laughed 2 rows ahead, a man argued with a bag that would not fit. Lena and Mark found their row without trouble. Their seats were together as planned. Window for Lena, aisle for Mark, a simple comfort after a hard day. Lena slid into her seat and looked outside at the workers guiding carts on the ground. Mark lifted their bags up, careful not to bump anyone, then sat with a slow breath. For a few minutes, everything felt peaceful, like the story would end before it began. Lena watched the wing and the gray sky, thinking about the meeting they would attend tomorrow. Mark checked the time, then set his phone face down, ready to disconnect. He liked flights because nobody expected much from him during them, just silence and patience. Lena liked flights because they were a pause, a moment where plans could not chase her. They shared a quick smile, the kind that said, "We made it, we can finally breathe." Then footsteps stopped beside their row, and the air shifted without warning. A flight attendant stood there, posture straight, expression tight, voice controlled but sharp. She looked at the siblings, then at the seat numbers, then at the aisle behind them. She said they needed to switch seats, right now, for another passenger. Mark blinked once, confused, then asked in a polite voice, "Why do we need to move?" Lena held her boarding pass higher, ready to show it, still calm, still respectful. The attendant repeated the request, not explaining, only saying it must be done. Several heads turned, because the tone did not match the normal cabin mood. Mark lifted his pass and showed the seat numbers clearly, trying to keep it simple. He said, "These are our assigned seats, we checked in early, we followed the rules." Lena nodded and added that they were fine to help if there was a real reason. The attendant did not offer one. She only insisted and glanced toward a white passenger nearby. That passenger avoided looking directly at Lena and Mark, staring forward as if distant. The siblings felt the attention in the cabin, not loud, but heavy, like a silent weight. Lena kept her face steady, but inside she felt that familiar warning, something is off. Mark asked again, kindly, "Can you explain what rule requires us to move?" The attendant's answer was vague, talking about comfort and preference, not policy. Mark stayed calm and asked if a supervisor could confirm it, just to be clear. The attendant's voice grew firmer, and her words felt less like a request and more like pressure. Lena noticed how people reacted, some watching closely, some looking away quickly. No one said anything yet, but the silence was loud in its own way. Lena leaned back, grounding herself, refusing to be pushed into panic. Mark turned slightly so his body did not block the aisle, showing he was not trying to fight. He spoke in simple words, calm words, saying, "We will not move without a clear reason." The attendant frowned, then said, "The other passenger needs the seats more than you do." Lena looked at the other passenger again and saw no injury, no special equipment, no urgent need. She saw only discomfort, the kind that can hide behind polite clothing and quiet looks. Her heart beat harder, but she kept her hands still on her lap, fingers lightly clasped. Mark asked for the supervisor one more time, steady as a metronome. The attendant paused, then said the supervisor was busy and they needed to cooperate. Mark nodded once, as if hearing her, but not accepting the unfairness beneath it. Lena whispered to Mark that they should document everything, calmly, without making a scene. Mark agreed, and he reached into his bag slowly, not sudden, not dramatic, just prepared. He took out his phone, and Lena held her pass in view, so the seat numbers were clear. The attendant noticed the phone and her eyes narrowed, like she did not like the direction. The cabin around them quieted even more, waiting, watching, measuring the moment. Mark opened a note on his phone and typed the time and the flight number. He asked the attendant for her name in a respectful tone, like it was normal procedure. She hesitated, then gave a first name only, still standing too close to their row. Mark thanked her and typed it, then asked again for a supervisor to confirm the request. The attendant repeated her demand, and the words now sounded like an instruction meant to end debate. Lena took a slow breath and spoke softly, "We are not refusing, we are asking for clarity." The attendant looked past them again, toward the waiting passenger, as if seeking approval. Mark made a choice that did not require raised voices or harsh words. He dialed a number, one they had saved for customer support and urgent concerns. Lena watched his face, calm and focused, the way he looked when solving a hard problem. When the call connected, Mark explained what was happening in short, clear sentences. He said they were being told to move from assigned seats without a stated policy reason. He said a supervisor was being refused, and the pressure was increasing. He kept his voice low, but every word landed like a stone placed carefully on a path. As Mark spoke, the flight attendant stepped back half a step, her certainty slipping. Lena could feel the cabin mood change, like people realized this would not be brushed away. A woman across the aisle watched with concern. A man behind them stopped typing on his laptop. Mark gave the support agent the seat numbers, the attendant's first name, and the exact phrasing he heard. He did not accuse, he did not shout, he simply reported, like someone reading facts for the record. Lena sat tall, quiet, dignified, refusing to shrink under the spotlight. The call ended with Mark saying thank you, and then the siblings waited, still in their seats, still steady. The call ended and Mark lowered his phone slowly back into his hand. Lena stayed seated with her shoulders relaxed and her gaze forward. The flight attendant stood nearby, no longer speaking with the same force. Her posture softened just enough to show uncertainty had entered. Around them the cabin felt different, like everyone sensed a shift. Passengers who had been silent now watched openly without shame. The moment was no longer private, and that mattered. The attendant stepped away toward the front of the plane. Her walk was quick but not confident like before. Lena noticed how the air felt lighter yet still tense. Mark leaned back slightly but stayed alert and focused. He whispered to Lena that they had done the right thing. She nodded, knowing calm action often carried quiet power. They waited without moving, trusting the process. A few minutes passed and felt longer than they were. A senior crew member approached with measured steps. His face carried professionalism and curiosity, not anger. He greeted Lena and Mark with respect and asked what happened. Mark explained, clearly repeating the facts without emotion. Lena added small details when needed, staying calm and precise. The crew member listened fully without interrupting. The senior crew member asked to see their boarding passes. Mark handed them over and Lena pointed to the seat numbers. The confirmation was immediate and visible on his face. He nodded slowly and thanked them for their patience. He said he would address the issue and stepped aside. The first attendant stood nearby, no longer making eye contact. The cabin remained quiet, waiting for resolution. The senior crew member spoke softly with the first attendant. Their conversation stayed private, but the tone was clear. Authority had entered the space and balance returned. The attendant nodded several times, her posture shrinking. Lena felt a mix of relief and sadness in her chest. Relief that fairness was being restored. Sadness that such moments still happened. The crew member returned and spoke directly to Lena and Mark. He confirmed their seats were correct and they would not move. He apologized for the discomfort and thanked them for staying calm. Mark thanked him in return with steady respect. Lena offered a small smile that carried strength. Nearby passengers let out quiet breaths they had been holding. The tension released slowly across the cabin. The other passenger was quietly reassigned without discussion. No announcement was made and no scene followed. The flight attendant moved away to another section. Lena felt the moment settle into memory rather than pain. Mark leaned back, closing his eyes for a brief second. They had stood their ground without raising their voices. That mattered more than winning. As the plane prepared for departure, the normal sounds returned. Seatbelts clicked and engines hummed with growing strength. Lena looked out the window again, feeling grounded. Mark rested his hands on his lap, breathing evenly. They shared no words but understood each other fully. Dignity had stayed with them through the pressure. And the journey continued with quiet resolve. The plane finally began to move away from the gate with a low, steady sound. Lena felt the vibration under her feet and let her shoulders relax. Mark opened his eyes and looked forward as the cabin lights softened. The earlier tension did not vanish, but it changed into quiet awareness. They both knew the moment had passed, but its meaning stayed close. Around them, passengers returned to their routines slowly. Normal life resumed, yet something had shifted beneath it. As the plane rolled forward, Lena thought about how fast peace can break. She remembered how calm the flight had felt just minutes earlier. One request had turned comfort into pressure without warning. She wondered how many others had felt the same in different places. Mark sensed her thoughts without her speaking a word. He had learned long ago to read silence as clearly as sound. Their shared history made understanding effortless. The safety message played, and people half listened as usual. Mark followed the instructions out of habit and respect. Lena fastened her seatbelt and folded her hands together. Her heartbeat finally slowed to a normal rhythm. She stared ahead, letting the steady voice wash over her. The simple act of breathing felt grounding and powerful. Calm returned not because the world changed but because she held it. As the plane lifted into the air, Lena felt weight leave her chest. The city below grew smaller and the cabin filled with quiet focus. Mark glanced at the window, then closed his eyes again. He replayed the moment in his mind, checking every word spoken. He felt proud, not loud proud, but steady proud. They had not given anger control over their choices. They had kept ownership of themselves. A woman across the aisle leaned forward and spoke softly. She told Lena she admired how they handled everything. Her voice carried kindness without curiosity or judgment. Lena thanked her with a gentle smile. The woman nodded and leaned back into her seat. That small exchange warmed the space around them. It reminded Lena that support often arrives quietly. Later, a flight attendant, not the first one, passed by. She offered water and snacks with professional ease. Her tone was neutral, respectful, and calm. Mark accepted the water and thanked her sincerely. Lena noticed the shift in behavior and felt validation. Not because of apology, but because respect was restored. Sometimes correction shows through changed action. As the plane reached cruising altitude, lights dimmed slightly. Passengers settled into movie sleep or quiet thought. Lena watched clouds stretch like endless fields below. She felt distance grow between herself and the earlier moment. Yet she knew it would stay with her in a different form. Not as pain but as proof of her strength. Memory does not always wound, sometimes it teaches. Mark thought about how easy it is for small power to be misused. He did not blame the entire system but saw its weak points. He believed change often begins with calm resistance. Not loud fights but firm boundaries clearly held. He hoped someone else watching would remember this moment. Not the tension but the way it was handled. That was the real message. Hours passed and the cabin grew quieter still. Lena slept lightly, dreaming of open spaces and sunlight. Mark read for a while, then rested his head back. The flight continued smoothly with no further disruption. The earlier moment now felt distant but meaningful. It had shaped the tone of the journey without defining it. They remained travelers, not victims. When the captain announced descent, Lena woke fully. She stretched gently, feeling present and strong. Mark gathered their belongings with familiar ease. They exchanged a look that said everything without words. They had faced something unfair and stayed whole. That mattered more than comfort or convenience. It was something they would carry forward. As the plane descended, Lena looked once more at the clouds. She felt gratitude for calm strength and shared resolve. Mark checked the time and smiled slightly. They were ready to step back into the world. Whatever waited beyond the gate, they would meet it together. The flight had given them more than transport. It had given them quiet confirmation of who they were. The plane touched the ground with a firm, steady motion. Lena felt the wheels meet the runway and her body relax. The long flight was ending and a new space waited ahead. Mark straightened in his seat and looked down the aisle. Around them people stirred, reaching for bags and coats. The shared silence of travel began to break into movement. As the plane slowed, Lena thought about what they would say later. Not to complain or demand anything, but to explain calmly. She believed stories mattered when they were told with care. Mark shared that belief and planned his words already. They had decided not to let the moment fade without record. Not for anger but for truth and clarity. When the seatbelt sign went off, the aisle filled quickly. People stood and stretched and spoke about connections. Lena remained seated, waiting for space to clear. Mark stood when it felt right, blocking no one. The earlier attendant was nowhere near their section. Another crew member smiled politely as she passed. Respect now moved easily where tension once lived. They stepped into the aisle together, moving slowly. Lena held her bag close and felt grounded. Mark checked behind them to be sure nothing was left. A woman who had watched earlier met Lena's eyes. She gave a small nod that carried understanding. No words were needed and none were spoken. Moments like that said enough. The jet bridge felt warmer and louder than the cabin. Footsteps echoed as people moved forward in waves. Lena felt the weight of travel return to her shoulders. Mark placed a hand on the rail, steady and patient. They moved with the crowd but kept their own pace. They were no longer under watch. They were simply people again. At the terminal entrance they paused for a moment. Mark suggested they file a formal note together. Lena agreed, knowing calm voices can still carry power. They found a quiet corner away from traffic. Mark opened his phone and began to type. Lena spoke details clearly and carefully. Each word chosen with intention. They described the time, the row, and the words used. They avoided blame and stayed focused on facts. Lena felt strength in the honesty of it. Mark believed clarity could open doors later. They sent the message and closed the phone. No applause followed, no scene was made. But something important had been done. As they walked toward baggage claim, Lena felt lighter. Not because the issue was erased, but because they had responded with dignity. Mark smiled slightly, sensing the same relief. The airport noise wrapped around them again. Life continued forward as it always does. Yet they carried a quiet win inside. Outside the terminal, evening air met them gently. Lights reflected on glass and moving cars. Lena took a deep breath, feeling present and whole. Mark looked at her and nodded once. They had faced a hard moment and stayed true. That strength would follow them beyond this trip. Into every place they went next. The days after the flight passed quietly, but the memory stayed present. Lena returned to her routine with a deeper sense of awareness. Mark went back to work, carrying the experience in his thoughts. They did not replay it with anger but with reflection. Each remembered small details like tone, posture, and silence. Those details mattered because they revealed unseen patterns. Understanding grew without bitterness. One evening Lena sat by her window watching the city lights. She thought about how many moments go unnoticed by others. She wondered how many people carry similar stories quietly. Not because they are weak but because they choose peace. Mark called her, and they spoke about nothing urgent. Yet the conversation circled back to the flight naturally. Some stories ask to be honored, not hidden. Mark believed the experience had strengthened something inside him. Not courage, because he already had that. But clarity about when to speak and when to stand firm. He knew silence can protect, but it can also allow harm. That balance was something he would carry forward. Not just for himself but for others watching quietly. Example travels farther than argument. Lena decided to write about the moment privately. Not to publish or accuse but to understand it fully. She wrote about calm choices and steady voices. She wrote about dignity that did not need permission. The words helped her see how far she had come. How she stayed grounded even when tested. That realization brought peace. Weeks later a message arrived from the airline. It thanked them for their detailed report and calm tone. It explained steps had been taken to review procedures. There was no drama in the message, only acknowledgement. Mark read it slowly, feeling a quiet sense of closure. Lena smiled, knowing their effort mattered. Change often begins unseen. They never spoke of the flight with pride. Only with honesty when asked. They told the story without exaggeration or blame. They focused on the choice to remain steady. Listeners often reacted with surprise and respect. Not because of conflict but because of composure. That was the true lesson. Over time the memory softened into wisdom. Lena noticed she carried herself differently now. Not guarded but assured. Mark noticed he listened more closely to others' stories. Both felt more connected to people around them. Shared humanity became clearer through contrast. Empathy grew stronger. One afternoon they traveled again on a different flight. The cabin felt familiar yet harmless. They took their seats and exchanged a knowing glance. No tension followed, only quiet readiness. This time nothing happened, and that was enough. Peace felt earned, not accidental. Growth does not need repetition. As the plane lifted, Lena closed her eyes calmly. Mark watched the sky change colors through the window. They were no longer shaped by one moment, but informed by it. Strength had settled into their bones quietly. They carried it forward without announcement. That was enough. Their journey continued far beyond airports and planes. Into daily choices and silent stands. They learned that respect can be protected without force. That calm truth holds lasting power. Their story did not end with applause. It ended with grounded hearts and steady steps. And that ending mattered most.